We'll get to Standard Bank's involvement or not in a moment, but broadly speaking, do you accept that there was some attempt at the manipulation of the rand?
Bongani, to the extent that there are parties that have entered into plea bargains and have agreed to settle, there must have been. So one has to accept that that may have happened. I don't have personal knowledge of it, but I think the proposition must be valid.
So this so-called then Forex cartel case, 28 banks initially implicated. The scale of what is being investigated, the implications thereof, that's potentially huge.
It's potentially huge, but its economic impact is de minimis, as the evidence will have shown.
Standard Chartered has admitted liability and will, on top of paying this 40+ million rand, no doubt cooperate with the tribunal. You say if they do name names, your bank won't be on that list.
Well, our position is very, very clear. We did extensive investigations and we offered these up to the authorities, and we continue to remain open to those conversations with them. We've looked at our call logs, we've looked at documentation, we've looked at people's calls, and I can tell you that our traders conduct themselves with impeccable rectitude, as do our salesmen and women, and we found no such evidence. And as I say, we offered this up to the authorities. I might just point out that if you read the opinion piece I wrote over the weekend, I make mention of a comment made by one of the most senior judges at the Competition Appeal Court, where he said, "Why have you got these guys here? They had nothing to do with this." Because there is no evidence. Now, if there was evidence, I also point out, we always own up and we always take our medicine. But it's important for the 50,000 people that work for this great institution that they know that principles of natural justice will apply. Where they are guilty of wrongdoing, we will act. Where they are not, we will protect them. It's very, very important that I make that point.
It's also important to underscore that there is, at least internationally, precedent for this type of thing. Wasn't it $2.5 billion? Some of the world's largest banks were charged in the US. Citicorp, JP Morgan, Chase and Company, Barclays PLC, and the Royal Bank of Scotland. If that kind of thing can happen at that scale internationally, the basic premise of a fix, these illicit chats of traders to alert each other and coordinate trading activities, it shouldn't be all that surprising that it could happen within banks here, should it?
It shouldn't, but we mustn't suffer the fallacy of drawing conclusions from matters that are irrelevant to South Africa. South Africa's got a very well-regulated and governed financial system. And indeed, there was a report post these events in October 2015, which, Bongos, I know that you suffer from insomnia. I'd recommend that you read it by James Cross. It's a thorough analysis, and it's on the SARB website where they thoroughly analyze those events. It's worth reading. There's a second one, of course, if you're still suffering from insomnia. This one is an econometrics one, also on the SARB website, issued on the 14th of November. Where they analyze herd behavior and this kind of thing. There is just no such evidence in respect of Standard Bank or the South African banks. And if there was, as I say, we would own it.
Is it your position that if there were to be evidence unearthed of involvement by anyone working with your bank, that ultimately these would be perhaps rogue traders acting on their own?
Yes, because nobody has any authority to enter into conversations with competitors on prices. Not only is it a criminal thing to do, it's thoroughly stupid, and our people are not. We monitor their activities, and as I've said to you, they are men and women of rectitude, and we trust them. But if there was evidence that they had acted out of malice or outside their mandate, we would act upon it. But as I say to you with confidence, there is no such evidence, and we will protect them.
Are your systems robust enough to be able to prevent or even detect such, if that were to have happened?
The systems are robust, but as you know, Bongs, a bank like the church is not a museum of saints, it's a school of sinners. There are people who find ways around systems and processes, but when we do find that they have acted inappropriately, we act upon it. I gave the example of Tanzania. I don't know if you remember the story. One of our teams in Tanzania participated in an orchestrated bribe, which was ghastly in every respect. And we self-reported. Our compliance staff picked it up. We reported it to the Tanzanian authorities, to the South African authorities, to the British authorities, to the American authorities, and we took our medicine. So I'm using that as an argument from parallel case to say where there are these instances, we will act. But where there aren't, we will protect the integrity of our institution and our people.
But if your safeguards might have failed, what culpability then would that expose you to?
It would expose us to fines and accountability. And as I say to you, in the competition appeal court, which is sort of the apex court in competition, these processes are slowly working their way through. And, you know, you were going to ask me what are the great things about South Africa. One of them is the laws. You know, South Africa is a country of laws, and they work. The judicial system works, and our courts will get to the bottom of this. Quite confident about that.
Lay people will listen to us in this conversation and say, hang on, fair enough that you can't take what has happened elsewhere and apply it to this jurisdiction, but even here we've seen collusion in various sectors, from construction right down to the price of bread. With the smoke, isn't there always a fire?
And South Africans are entitled to insist on the laws and regulations being applied with strictness and fidelity. There'll be charges. Those charges must be followed. There must be evidence, and it must be investigated dispassionately, as opposed to mob justice. Where there's smoke, there's fire, then let's act. Because that's actually what's happening here, right? They are banksters, so banksters all behave badly, therefore they're all guilty. I'm saying to you, that is not appropriate. We're a country of laws, and we must follow the principles that apply in each of these instances.
It's fair to
and lay people would want us to do that, right?
I would say,
but for the grace of God, go I.
It's fair to assume, I mean, you've come out very strongly on this. You've written the opinion piece you are referring to, and I have read it. You're obviously taking this interview. It would be fair to assume you've spoken to your legal team, you've spoken to your foreign exchange department.
Yes, I have.
I'm going to give the example of the apology Maria Ramos issued in 2017 when she was at the helm of Absa, a competitor of yours.
Yes.
They've been granted immunity on the basis, of course, that they might testify against other banks. And so, yes, I know, collective punishment, guilt by association isn't fair, but isn't it reasonable to conclude that there are possibilities? If Absa did it...
No, that would be a fallacious form of reasoning. It's completely inappropriate. What Maria Ramos said applies to Absa and Barclays, which had a different corporate structure, was controlled from the United Kingdom, managed very differently to us. And what she said about Absa cannot apply to Standard Bank. It's just false to draw the conclusion.
You've spoken, of course, in your piece about Standard Bank's role as a patriotic corporate citizen and your investment in South Africa and the monies you contribute to the fiscus and indeed to your shareholders. What did you then respond, having come out as strongly as you have, with a denial of your bank's involvement in all of this? What did you make of the comments that I alluded to in my introduction made by the minister in the presidency about the private sector?
One has to have respect and reverence for elected officials, and they've got information and they are responding to forces that are peculiar to their offices. And I, as a citizen and a corporate leader, have to respect that. But I can tell you what Standard Bank does and what Standard Bank stands for, and simply summarize it by saying we're patriotic because we believe that the structural reforms that are being effected in the country are going to contribute to between 2 and 4% of the GDP of the country if executed with discipline. That is electricity, logistics, crime. That when that happens, it will improve the quality of life of South Africans, and that we have got our shoulders to the wheel, and we continue to make those contributions to structural reforms. We also, Bongani, when we speak as Standard Bank, we've often been accused of being naive, and some have even said optimistic to the extent of stupidity, but we continue to be optimistic about our country because we believe it has got incredible competitive advantages. The South African national competitive advantage is second to none, and we are supportive of it, and we'll keep making our contribution to it. Our universities, our Department of Science and Technology, our courts, our business sector, our fourth estate, your great fourth estate, all of these are fantastic for the South African national competitive advantage. And the growth of our economy is important to us. We're dependent on it. Our stakeholders are dependent on it, and we're determined to make a good contribution there too.
How long does that stay in place? I understand, of course, that we've got an election coming up next year, and it is silly season as far as politics is concerned. But how long does all of that stay in place? How long does this robust banking sector you boasted about earlier stay in place when this kind of thing becomes the dominant narrative from senior members of government, from MPs who were lambasting the banks around this issue, and as you say, as far as your bank is concerned, without much substance?
MPs are doing what is consistent with their profession. They are holding people to account, and we respect them for that. But respect and civility is not weakness or feeble-mindedness, isn't it? We'll continue to make our case. We'll respond with respect. We'll put facts on the table, and rational and reasonable MPs understand that stuff. And we'll just continue to politely, respectfully make our case, as we hereby do, as I'm doing with you.
Sim Tshabalala, the CEO of the Standard Bank Group, the largest private sector financial institution in this country, who says they had no part in the manipulation of the currency.